Good evening. Glad to see a good turnout tonight. My name is Justin Setcher. I'm the town planner for the town of Franklin. And in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to our consultant team. But I just want to thank everybody for coming out. Glad to see some interest in the comp plan for the town of Franklin. It's going to be it's a good plan. It's the town and the citizens and visitors, tourists. It's everybody's plan. This plan's for everybody. Input from the community. It's not one single person's plan or steering committee or anything. So the way this will go tonight, we'll have a quick presentation, which will be presented by our consultant team. And then after that, we'll probably have a little bit of some, Stephen will have a little bit more details on how we're going to do with maybe have there's some comments section where you can write some comments and pages over there if you didn't get any, and we'll probably use some more stickies on the maps where you can suggest changes or concerns or likes or dislikes. And before I get introduction, there's a sign-in sheet, and I hope everybody before you leave hit that sign-in sheet so we get a good accurate count of how many people are here tonight. Plus I think there's email on there maybe, or we can send you more updates. So I'll go ahead and turn this over to, first we've got Stephen Faber from Stewart. He's going to be our lead consultant on the presentation. And then we got Rachel Ronson, who's going to be our transportation expert. She's going to take a few slides. And then we've got Stacy Guffey is going to hit a few slides as well. And he's going to focus on economic development. And then I'll get the end. So I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Thanks, Justin, and thank you all for coming out tonight. You guys may have seen some of the work that we've already been doing. Right now, we're kind of coming down the home stretch of our comprehensive draft plan. We've been working on this for about a year now, getting a lot of public input, drafting the plan itself, putting a lot of this information on the website, and conducting these kinds of meetings. So this is work in progress still, and we still are welcoming feedback both on the comment section that Justin mentioned, but also on our website. We have surveys, so this is still evolving. We're still taking input, so please send us anything that you want us to incorporate or consider. So just talking about the process, what we've heard, like I was saying, a lot of the input over last year, we've been taking all these sticky notes and compiling everything into our plan recommendations. Basically, the draft comp plan is a document, but we also within that document have a future land use plan. And this really talks about how you may consider zoning in the future related to land use and housing, what the downtown may start to shape up in terms of mix of uses. We also in the book itself talk about the economic development and infrastructure needs or opportunities, natural and cultural resources location, and then transportation ideas for like pedestrian connectivity, vehicle connectivity, parking, and those things. And then next steps, after tonight, there will be a steering committee meeting, I believe, in 2 weeks. And then we will have one more public hearing with council in the month of April. And that's where you guys will be able to come out again and give input. So, what's a land use plan? So land use plan is a tool that we use for guiding growth, redevelopment, overall improvements to the town. The last plan that was done for Franklin was in 2007, and so this is an update, and there will be updates in the future, so they constantly build on each other. So the document I was mentioning incorporates all the feedback we've been getting and also the research that we've been doing, and it provides a guide for infrastructure investment and decisions. The plan process, we had a project initiation about a year ago. We've been going through this analysis effort ongoing. We had a charrette back in the summer, I think July or August. There were like 3 days worth of meetings and drawing a lot of the design work that you guys see. And then the plan development, which is really pulling all this together into the document. So that's what's been going on. Public engagement process included stakeholder interviews. We had 5 steering committee meetings, 8 public meetings and events. And so far today, we've had about 420 responses to the survey. So, if you haven't done that, go online and do that. And then back in July, that public charrette and meetings that I was mentioning, this was kind of the schedule. And we had tables like this kind of set up and, took sticky notes and we're really talking about what you guys wanted and what you guys were thinking about. And we pulled that all into the document. And then at the end of that 3 days, we gave a presentation. What we've heard so far, what do you guys value most? So I think Franklin, it's all about town character. And, the scenery and the setting in which Franklin is really important. The mountains, access to nature, and then the people, both people that are coming into the community and people that have been here. And then keep, toss, create. This is something we do to kind of facilitate, well, what do you like, what don't you like, what would you like to see created? And so during that charrette that we had back in July, that's the kind of stuff that we were putting out there for you guys to comment on. We had some character boards where you could put sticky dots on and talk about things you liked. And what we found was, creating identity was important, embracing the river, infill where appropriate, both downtown and other areas of town. Wanted to strengthen connections to recreation, so a lot of this public land that's around you, making better connections to that. Support existing businesses and industries and even some of the districts in which these industries and businesses still are thriving in. So from a residential side, what we heard was, from a single family standpoint, the 3 pictures on the left were things that we showed and you guys identified with that you liked. Single family units that were maybe small cottage-like in the upper left, but detached. And then, the second picture is more like a traditional neighborhood development where it's very walkable. Cars, are in back of the homes and, they might front on green spaces and things like that. So, TNDs are typically infill, but they're also kind of a little bit of a community in and of themselves. And then down at the bottom is some attached townhouse product that kind of feels and looks like a single family home. These were all things that you guys liked. What you guys didn't like clearly was a picture of some pretty industrial looking townhomes with big fat garages on the front, So this was the residential. On the commercial side of things, you guys really like the downtown character feel of what you have in Franklin, but also what, North Carolina mountain towns have. And so these pictures on the left really illustrated some of what you guys really liked. 2 to 3 stories, pedestrian scale, window shopping, a lot of, signage and things like that, some on-street parking. I think also the consistency of materials and build, kind of look and feel of the building, that was also important. On the right is kind of your typical vehicle-oriented shopping development, and some of that's already here in Franklin, but it's not something you guys want to see more of. So this is something we're going to try to strategically move away from or adjust because it's here. Downtown needs, so some of the other things beyond just the buildings and so forth, there are some of the other elements like public art. How do we handle and use the second stories or third stories even above some of these downtown buildings? Can they be converted to a residential use or office or something like that? So, that's something that's going to be an ongoing thing to figure out, but it's definitely an opportunity. And then, on the right here, Main Street's not the only important street. There are also, secondary streets, one block off of Main, and some alleys that could be turned into some really nice pedestrian walkways. Maybe even some of the businesses that have back doors or front doors on those alleys can, feel like they're spruced up. So, plan recommendations. So this is what I was talking about with the future land use plan. Right now, you guys in the back, we've got one printed out of your current zoning and how that's used, but this is a future zoning map. And so with all the input, within the ETJ, which is the dashed line going around, what would the town look like in the next 50 years or future 50 years if things were built out using a zoning like this? And so what we're trying to do here is show where to focus mixed use, residential uses, commercial, public uses, and so forth. And this really helps set up some of the opportunities and guidelines for how development can occur and redevelopment can happen. So within that future land use map, we've got the conservation recreation use, and so this is really your big parks, your open space, a lot of the public lands. On the lighter green side, this would be kind of on the periphery of development or of density or your ETJ, and what you'd have here is maybe an idea of a residential use that's surrounded by green space. So it doesn't dominate the green space actually kind of comes in and around the development. The yellow is kind of your low to medium density residential. This would be about 2 to 5 residential units per acre. You currently have some of this right now, but there's some zoning regulations that lay on top of it that don't really allow more development to occur or more density to occur beyond a 10,000 square foot unit on X amount of space. So if we want to increase infill to allow a little bit more low or medium density, some of the zoning guidelines and requirements may need to get adjusted. But it's something we're promoting. And then the orange is your kind of traditional neighborhood development, which I spoke about earlier, and that's the picture down at the lower right. So this is, once again, the future land use. And like I said, the yellow, this is kind of that 2 to 5 units per acre density. Then you have your low impact residential use, which is on the periphery. And the dark green, as I was mentioning, is that public land, open space, recreational space. Okay. So then some of the other uses that we are suggesting in the future land use is neighborhood mixed use. So this would bring in a commercial or business element, retail element into maybe some of these neighborhoods, so you have destinations to walk to, and it's not just downtown or it's not just way down on the south side of town. This creates a little bit of those businesses and shopping opportunities within the neighborhood in a walkable space. The urban mixed use is really what we're talking about, a 2 to 3 story idea that would be downtown, or maybe a conversion of a shopping center where we bring in a mix of uses, and that commercial shopping center might not just be retail anymore. Downtown spoke about with 2 to 3 stories and figuring out what to do on the top stories. On the commercial side, if we do commercial, it might look something more like this. And then office and employment, some of that's already happening. I think, it's just about defining where it goes and what it looks like. Land use and housing. So going back to the single family, we want to allow for a mix of these uses and lot sizes. We'd like to allow for some units to come in closer to downtown, so that infill opportunity that I was talking about. If there are larger tracts, you might be able to get like a little traditional neighborhood development, and that you can almost apply an overlay to that space. So it doesn't have to actually be zoned for TND, but you can provide an overlay on top of the existing zoning to allow for that option to happen. And then also talking about, as we get closer to downtown, considering smaller lots. I mean, you know, there are thoughts about, you know, people wanting to downsize or younger generations coming in and not wanting a bigger home. So allowing these opportunities to be closer downtown is what we're talking about. And then also talking about going back to this is the yellow is the R1, residential 1, but that medium to low density. Currently, right now, with the zoning you guys have, the R1 basically has a couple components to it where you're allowed to only have about 10,000 square feet on a lot. And on top of that, that lot also has to allow for about 40% of open space. And so what you end up having are these big lots and gaps between homes. And that doesn't really allow, with those two ordinances within the zoning, doesn't allow you to create infill. So of those two things, they're going to have to get rethought about to allow for some of this higher density residential to come in, smaller lots and smaller homes. And then also, you know, within this kind of low to medium density, if we can create infill opportunity, we also don't have to provide as many sewer and utility services out to new developments. And so, because the infrastructure is already there. Talking about going a step further out now, so this was kind of what I was mentioning about the residential use where it might be surrounded by green space. So this is kind of an illustration on the right about what that would look like or could look like. But you know, you kind of create little pockets of development of residential use, and then you bring in, you know, kind of the public realm and open space, and then you might have more active little green areas that the buildings front onto. It's kind of a mix of a TND, but also it can be a low impact development that happens on the periphery of town. And then going back to the commercial, so, you know, this is, I think, Highlands Road here, and this is one of the developed shopping centers on there. You know, one of the things that, you know, we could do immediately without talking about mixed use and, you know, really changing these places is, you know, just providing a little bit of aesthetic upgrades to either the facades or providing some greenery in front of the buildings, or even along the street here, providing maybe some more street trees, maybe a little bit more plantings and so forth. And within the parking itself, there, you know, you could provide also some parking lot trees. Those are things that can be done with very little cost and impact to the actual zoning and the development itself. And then going to downtown, so updating the regulations to include design requirements that match historic character. So, you know, right now you guys already have a lot of historic character. I think creating some design guidelines that protect and enhance that is something that, you know, we'd like to support. Down in the, down the lower left here, one of the things that, you know, we heard that you guys didn't want is a lot of buildings in the downtown area pushed away from the street and then have parking out front. You know, the idea would be actually more like what we're seeing up here, where buildings kind of come up to the streetscape. Parking is actually around back of the building, and then up front where there's shopping and there's visibility, that's more pedestrian oriented. And so that allows for the businesses and other uses to be more visible and prosperous. And then this is just a picture of kind of how, you know, a little bit of a historical building may look as it comes up closer to the street. And then also, as I mentioned, it's not just about Main Street, it's also about alleys and secondary streets off of Main within the downtown area. providing, nice sidewalk space to walk on, maybe some tables and chairs out front, so enough space to have the businesses come out into the pedestrian realm. This is actually a picture of the alley behind Main Street, where some of the businesses actually front, and so this is just a rendering or an idea of how that might be able to be spruced up. But one of the things too would be in these alleys or secondary streets, finding more adequate locations for trash, maybe aggregating it together so there's not so many different trash and recycling bins out. Those are all just ideas that can help sprucing up these areas. And then, stepping back now beyond kind of the zoning, there's some areas in the downtown area in Franklin that we looked at that might look to be districts that could be redeveloped over time to include a lot of what we just talked about, mix of uses from office to residential to some commercial space. And these areas would serve as kind of gateways or areas that would attract, tourists and other people to come shop, come, walk around in. And this is what we're calling the Niquosi Cultural Arts District. And I think the main point we want to make here is that, there's an opportunity for some of the block space around the Niquosi Mound to be developed. And because there's a lot of interest from the tribe and elsewhere that would like to see this turned into a cultural monument, this could be a nice start to a district that might see some more development in it. And so this by no means is what could happen. This is just an idea that we're talking about. And it also, one other thing, it focuses the buildings up closer to the streets with either parallel on-street parking, more parking lot parking in the back, and then pedestrian crossings to all these different places and spaces. And I should say, a connection to the river. And then on the other side of the Niquosi District, one other area that we looked at was the Whitmire property and River Market. Right now, the Whitmire property is owned by the town, and it's basically a greenfield site. There's used to be an old residence up there that could be part of a cultural element to this district, but what we're thinking about here is an opportunity to bridge the gap between the river, this watershed park where the creek moves through, and then a residential and mixed-use component that would connect you to the neighborhoods farther up towards the highway. And so now this has a number of good elements that would kind of allow this district to grow and thrive and connect people to, Franklin, the river, and neighborhoods. The other thing I should mention with the Whitmire property is, whatever is done here could also offset some of the goals and provide some equity towards other ideas that the town has. So this becomes an important piece for whatever happens. And then economic development and infrastructure. I think Stacy, I think this is your slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Stacy, who's been working with us on the economic side.
So in looking at economic development, there are a couple of things that we wanted to do. One is to assess where we are currently, look at strategies that work in similar communities, and also be realistic about what can be done in Franklin. I think most of us know that the era of attracting manufacturing, things like that, where you're competing with everybody across the country, in most cases, places that have better physical infrastructure than we do, those days are over. So what are the assets that we have in Franklin? What are the common things that people tell us when we ask them why they're in Franklin, why they moved their business here, or why they kept their business here, or why they're growing their business here? And it all ties in with what Stephen's been talking about, which is the quality of life. That's really the economic driver. That's why I know a lot of you in the room have moved to Franklin from other areas, and I'm sure you're here because of those things that were on the first slide. Well, that's true also for a lot of our local business owners. So that being our advantage, then what is our disadvantage? And the points that you see here on this slide are only a sample of what is in the actual plan. So there's some strategies in the plan based on what we learned, and then there's some details about how to go about those strategies. But one of the examples we talk about is the provision of broadband. We have talked to and met a lot of people who are interested in either bringing a business here or expanding a business in Franklin, but this is the one area of infrastructure where we lack competitiveness. And in some cases, it's not that the infrastructure is not in place, it's that it's unaffordable. So one of the recommendations is to take a look at where the infrastructure is, what are the affordability issues, and then how do we solve that. So that's just an example. There are more points on the Economic Development Board back in the back, and when you are walking around mingling, if you want to talk about it with me, just grab me and we'll talk about it. Thanks.
Okay, natural and cultural resources. You know, what we're trying to do here is to, you know, and what we've been hearing is, you know, one of the parts about the quality of life here is promoting the outdoors and connecting to those places around Franklin. And so I think this is one of the big things that we want to do, not just with where we want to preserve open space and public lands, but also how we connect to them. And Rachel's going to be talking a little bit on a couple slides here about some of the trails ideas that we have, some of the sidewalk improvements that we're talking about that allow you to work your way out to all these places. But some of the other things that we're also talking about are extensions on the Greenway, along the river, neighborhood connections, which, you know, that's going back to sidewalks, pocket parks, which are really small kind of residential size parks, playgrounds within neighborhoods or neighborhood districts. And then actually as we come down through the neighborhoods, providing access to the river. Rachel is going to speak about trails and greenways.
As Justin said, I'm Rachel Bronson. I work for a transportation firm based out of Asheville. And we looked at the transportation and bike ped aspects for this plan. And I think one of the things we heard loud and clear is that there's a desire for more biking and walking in the town. And this is a map that's also on a board in the back, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it after the presentation. But this essentially pulls together several of the recommended greenways from the bike ped plan that was done in 2017, and also the Bartram Trail alignments and the reroute. You can see the reroute shown up here. So pulling that into downtown. We had some key action items that came out of some of these broader recommendations from the plan, and one of those is extending Little Tennessee Greenway into downtown under the bridges and out to the rec center was one of the key recommendations in terms of greenways. Other transportation recommendations, as I mentioned, really more of a focus on the bicycle pedestrian side of things. So expanding the sidewalk network in downtown and from outlying neighborhoods, which were kind of off the hill connections into downtown. And in terms of sort of the policy side of things, looking at ways to evaluate the street network to bring in more bicycle pedestrian and transit improvements. So that's what this second point is referring to. Level of service is a way to measure the transportation network. And how do we expand that to talk not just about vehicles and vehicle mobility and congestion, but how do we bring that pedestrian and bicycle side into the conversation? Here's some photos of existing. There's Justin trying to cross downtown mid-block, and then sidewalk in town that obviously needs some help. Maybe that's not even sidewalk. And also in the back, we've got some ideas on some street cross sections in town. We did a focus on a few of the streets in town to say, what could these streets look like? We really pulled on some previous planning documents that had been done in town, so the bike walk plan, as I mentioned, downtown master plan, and some other studies to say, we want to make sure that we're coordinating with previous planning studies, but also bringing in some new ideas. So here's an example of an idea for Highlands Road with median on-street parking and a detached sidewalk, so a sidewalk that's pulled away with a planting strip or a tree. And so we did some visioning on a number of streets, and again, I'd be happy to talk to you about that after the presentation.
I think that's it. All right, so this is our last slide. So the next steps are everybody after this can mingle, fill out the comment section, talk, look at the maps, mark, we've got some sticky notes. Are any of the colors in here? Or are they just?
No, I think the colors, the colors are kind of open, so.
Yeah, so it's no, colors don't mean anything.
As long as you're clear on what you want or don't want,
Yeah.
we'll figure it out.
So you can mark up anything you want, put a sticky note on the maps and ideas. But so hopefully after tonight, take comments, tweak it a little bit more. Later this month, March the 16th, the planning board our team will present to the planning board, which is open. Those meetings are always, it's the third Monday of the month at 4 p.m. at Town Hall, downstairs in the boardroom. And then after that, if the planning board is happy with the draft at that point, if they need to look at it again, they can have another meeting, maybe the next week. But the goal is to have it done, a finished document done for the town council to have a public hearing at their April 6th meeting, where there'll be another presentation, more time to comment from the public and then not looking for an adoption that night, then giving the town council some time to sway it, look over it, any thoughts they might have, and then hopefully you have an adoption in May. So that, if anybody's got any questions, here's my email. You can email me, or you can call me at Town Hall. And then Jake Piotrowski is the project manager. Stephen had to fill in for Jake. Jake's on his way to Pennsylvania. His grandmother passed away yesterday. But there's Jake's email, and you can email him or me, and happy to talk to you. And then, any questions for us?
Yeah, so we'll open it up for about 5-10 minutes for questions, and then we'll be in the back, all four of us. And we can walk around and help answer questions and just kind of keep an open forum. So.
With plans like this, and we've done them in the past, is there a renewed sense of some sort of dedication to appearance in Franklin? Because I don't, all the pictures, the slides that you put up there are very nice. We have a lot of manicured residential areas, stuff like that. But is there any dedication from the town as far as enforcement goes to deal with appearance?
You talking about like junk cars, minimum housing, that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, that's been a kind of an ongoing battle that we've been trying to combat in town and around, even in the ETJ. So it's something we're continuing to do. You've seen, I don't know if you've seen in the papers how we've been, getting some property owners, making them clean up their houses, and generally do a couple of nuisance violations a month out of my office, and people cleaning up trash in their yard and so on. But there's still a lot more work to be done. So it's something we're going to keep working on.
And I think just to also answer on top of that, the future land use plan and the zoning that we are suggesting within this document, that kind of starts to set up the form and function of how those pictures start to kind of come out of the ground and look like. On top of that, you can get detailed with design guidelines and zoning guidelines that are within that zoning use. Those have still yet to be kind of defined and developed, and so that's another layer that comes after all of this that, can or may not happen, but at least the zoning starts to set the form and the function.
I have a question that is related, and it's not a big deal. I have sold at farmer's market intermittently downtown. Are there any, is the town happy with it like it is, basically? Or is there thoughts of maybe it ought to move someplace else or anything? Just thought it's an opportunity to ask. Or have y'all even thought about it? Because the market is fine. I'm not saying it needs.
I know there's been some discussion in the past,
Yes,
from
sir.
other organizations on farmers markets, but obviously open to any suggestions or ideas or for the future, if people are happy where it is or they think it needs to grow, if it's outgrown its space, anything. So just let us know your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, the one suggestion I can make is that there is a little section between the parking lot where farmer's market is and kind of this sidewalk more or less in front of what used to be the Carenet thrift store. That will greatly benefit from the sidewalk. There is none right now. And there may be some reason why there isn't, but as it is, there are just a few stepping stones. Plus, I saw that in.
Okay.
Well, we might be able to add that to the plan, because as we talk about sidewalks and pedestrian connections, if it's something that we're not shown, or you can talk to me or one of us after this, and we can go identify and try to include it on the
Yeah, 'cause I
plan.
think it's less than 10 feet. It's not anything huge, but there's a little bit of a grade.
All right,
So that could be-
we'll try to make sure it shows up.
Any others?
Say everything goes according to plan, what's on there gets adopted by the town council in May. So what happens then? Who's driving the bus? Because now you've got this plan. Who's gonna say, okay, this is what we're working on next, or we're working on this section of it or that section of it, as opposed to it's just there taking up space on somebody's shelf?
Yeah. I would like, obviously it'll be a little bit on me, it's out of my department. But I'd like to see maybe, a couple people in our town that review it every quarterly or something and see where we're doing on some of the tasks and see what, which ones we can do. Obviously, some of the items are some quick fix key items I think we can do pretty quick. And then we've got some that'll obviously long range, gonna take a lot of planning to get to. But yeah, I'm not big on plans sitting on shelves. So I like to see them getting used.
Historically, I know we've been interested in developing some use of the upstairs of the downtown building. And I just wonder if there's any progress on that. I know they're owned by various individuals, and they would require a lot of work, I assume.
Yeah, we've had some conversations. When part of the tour, we went in some of those upstairs. We got the keys from some of the property owners and went in and looked and seen what it would take. And so there's been a lot of discussion. Good thing is our downtown, a lot of people know our downtown's in an opportunity zone, which is a beast in its own. But there is a lot of potential there for an investor to use those opportunity zones in downtown to create more investment and get a bigger return on their investment as well with some tax credits, especially if it's going for creating jobs or residents and so on. So yeah, it's definitely something, but it's going to be, it'll take some coordination from the property owners as well, being willing to tackle that.
Yeah, I
It's
think.
exciting to think about that happening.
Yeah, and I think some of the other towns that are also going through, trying to figure out some of the similar things, there also can be lessons learned from them where they might be a little further along, Asheville and Waynesville and stuff, and they may not have ideas of grant money that can be put towards that public grant money. some of the marketing of these spaces and getting like a downtown commission together to start trying to enact some of these ideas or learning from other towns. I mean, those are all kind of next step implementation ideas that you guys can all start looking into. So,
Any others? If not, we can mingle, and if you got any more questions, we'll be around and take some more and get the comments, maybe fill out some comment sections before you leave, and make sure you sign in.
How are you? I was here 6 hours late. I just really want.